Hi everyone, welcome to another tutorial video. This is going to be a long one. In this video, I'm going to take you through every feature available on FM8. So I've done a similar one with Native Instruments Massive, and there have been requests to do a similar thing with FM8 as well. Alright, so let's get right into it. I will put timestamps for the different sections of the tutorial, so feel free to skip around if you'd like. So let's start with the upper interface over here. Clicking on this button will just hide the main interface, and clicking over here will hide the keyboard. I would say both are important. There's a file menu which is fairly straightforward. You can load in a new preset, starting from scratch to get this pure sine wave tone. You can open a sound, save your patches. You can import patches from older versions of FM8 or FM7 specifically. And you can even import sysx files. So let's say if you had a DX7 lying around, or even if you can go on the internet and download DX7 patches, you can import them and it'll work totally fine in FM8. In fact, I have some over here. All right, so that's the file menu. This is the preset name. You can browse through the next preset by just clicking on this button, and this were previous. Fairly straightforward stuff. I'm going to reset this back to the default. Over here, you can quickly turn on the Arpeggiator. There's a very fancy Arpeggiator built into FM8, so I can just click this button to activate or deactivate it. Edit all will make more sense when we look at the morphing section, but this is a quick access for the morph pad. We'll look at that later on. Your overall polyphony, which you can adjust by just clicking and dragging. So now it's monophonic, and it's polyphonic set to 9 voices. CPU usage, overall CPU usage, and this is just an indicator if the synth is receiving MIDI. I'm not sure what this E does. You can't click on it. Maybe it's some kind of indicator that tells you something, maybe an overload. I'm not specifically sure what that is. All right, moving along to the right over here, we have a spectrum view that shows you the individual harmonics in the sound. So right now we have a very simple tone, just a sine wave, so we just get this one harmonic. But if I was to add in some modulation, you can see additional harmonics being introduced. Of course, this can also be viewed over here in a bit more detail. Next is just a meter. This is your panic button. So if things go out of hand, things are too loud, or you have some kind of a tone that's droning along, you can just hit that button to kill all sounds. And this button is for MIDI mapping. All right, let's check out the navigator here so we can look at all these different tabs. Starting with the browser, again, fairly straightforward if you've ever used any instrument from Native Instruments. So they have this browser where you choose a bank, then you choose a type of a preset you're looking for, choose a subtype, choose a mode, and then you narrow down to a particular set of presets, or in this case, just as one preset. FM8 also runs as an audio effect. Oh wow, look at that. There we go. So perfect example of using that panic button. So as I was saying, FM8 also runs as an audio effect. So we can click over here and look at the effects preset. Not as many here though. All right, so instrument presets, effect presets. There's this program option. So if you turn this on, you can create like a set of patches, like a live performance, for example. And you can access these or scroll through these using program change messages. You'll also notice over here it says PC for program change when you turn this feature on. So if you want to navigate through a specific set of presets, you can use a program list. You get a total of 128 programs in this program list. You can import program lists and also export them. So let's say for a concert or for a live performance, you need to create a program list, export and save it, and reuse that in the future. All right, I've literally never use this. Moving along, I have this preset loaded in. I can click on attributes here to see the attributes of this preset. Oh, it's made by Junkie XL. What is up with that note being stuck? Yeah, you can look at the attributes of a preset, but when you make your own presets, you can actually add in your own name here and add some comments as well. All right, fairly straightforward stuff. Let's check out the master section. So here we have an overall output level control, input level control. So if you're using FM8 as audio effect, you can adjust the level that's coming into FM8. Now the signal coming into FM8 will be set up in your DAW. So you'll have to figure out how to do that. And once you can get signal into the synth, you can adjust the level here. Maximum polyphony, so you can set your maximum number of voices, and instead of scrolling all the way down to 1, you can just hit this button here to make the synth monophonic. Let me choose a different preset. This preset is a little annoying. Yeah, this is perfect. So it's polyphonic right now. If I turn on the mono button, it becomes monophonic. Then you have the unison section. Classic feature you'll see on many modern synths. So you can set the number of voices you want for unison. You can detune those voices. You can stereo spread those voices. Not showing much of a difference here, but yeah, that typically should create some kind of a stereo widening effect. You can increase the number of voices for unison here as well. This dynamic thing is kind of interesting. So let's take a look at an example. Let's say I have, that's quite a simple sound. Let's make this a bit more like a sawtooth. All right, so let's say that's my sound. I'm going to go in here and set my polyphony to, let's say 4. Right, so I can only play up to 4 notes simultaneously. Let's set the voices to 2. So when I play 1 note, 2 voices are being used up. Of course, I can detune those 2 voices. Oh, now we can hear the panning. Oh yeah, I think there's this weird thing about panning. You'll only hear the change when you let go of the note. If you hold a note down and if you adjust the panner, you're not going to hear any change whatsoever. But if you let go of a note and play it again, then you're going to hear the stereo spread. So, weird thing about the panner. It's always been like this. Anyway, so going back to the voices thing here and the dynamic feature. So as I was saying, I'm playing a note, and right now 2 voices are being used out of 4. If I turn off dynamic, it'll be exactly the same thing. If I add a second note, so 2 voices for this note, 2 voices for the A, and we've already maxed out the number of voices. If I play another note, it kills, you can see here it stopped that. I was still holding down F, but it basically killed that voice. So that's how polyphony works. It'll just cancel the oldest note and let you play new notes. But if I turn on dynamic, if I play a note, it has it's using 2 notes for that one. Oh, sorry, it's using 2 voices for that one note. If I play another note, same thing. Now it's reached the maximum. If I try to play another note, it doesn't kill the first voice. It just thins out the polyphony. Or thins out the unison, sorry. If I play another note, at this moment with 4 notes, we do not have any unison because each note is taking up a voice. If I add another note now it kills another voice. So pretty interesting how dynamic works. So you can kind of, depending on the number of notes you play, the unison can basically get thicker or thinner. I believe the Moog Matriarch does a similar thing with its, not unison, but polyphony. Whatever, let's move along. So pitch controls, master tuning. Double click to reset it. Transpose. You have these weird buttons you can click on to adjust it, or you can even click and drag. I believe if you double click, you can even type in a value. Alright, let's talk about pitch bend. This is kind of interesting. So normal mode means I play a note, pitch bend up, pitch bend down, it bends the pitch. In fact, if you play an entire chord, the entire chord gets pitched up and down. That's just how pitch bend works. But we can switch to this lowest mode. So now, out of these 3 notes, the lowest note is going to be bent with the pitch bend. Which is kind of cool. So it doesn't bend the other 2 notes, just this one note. Kind of like an MPE controller, but in a very limited way. So that was lowest and highest. That's the opposite. The highest note will get bent. Then we have key on. That's interesting. So basically, pitch bend works while you're holding down a note, and when you release, the pitch bend will still work. Typically, that's how most pitch bend controllers work. Now, we don't have any sound, so let me just go ahead and give this operator some release so we can hear the sound while it's being released. Let's make it even longer. All right, so now going back in here. So the pitch bend in normal mode You can see I let go of the note and I'm bending the pitch, and we can hear the pitch being bent. But if I switch to key on, it doesn't bend when you release. So could be useful, but that's that. Latest, I believe it'll just bend the most recent note. So in this case, it was bending the note C because that was the most recent note that I played. All right, I'm going to switch back to normal here. Next, portamento, very cool feature. Turn it on. You can get that gliding effect, and it also works in polyphonic mode. So if I play a chord, we glide from one chord to another. This is your glide time. Way too long. Auto is basically like a legato feature, but this unfortunately does not work in polyphonic mode. It only works in monophonic mode. So in monophonic mode, if auto is on, glide won't happen if you play separate notes. But if you play legato, we get the gliding effect. If auto is off, you always get that gliding effect. All right, portamento, straightforward. Arpeggiator, now there's a quick on-off switch for the arpeggiator over here, and the same thing over here. You can adjust the BPM, though it's not going to change because it's locked to the project tempo right now. The number of steps, or not the number of steps, the rate of the arpeggiation. You can adjust that here. Key sync. Key sync is not what you might think it means, like syncing the keys to the tempo. That's already done with the BPM. Key sync is basically, it'll make more sense if you look at the actual arpeggiator. So yes, it is an arpeggiator, but it's kind of like a step sequencer / arpeggiator. So you can see this guy running along. So when I press a note or play a chord, we just hear it at any given moment. It's just running along. It doesn't care if you press a note or not. You're just going to hear the arpeggiation or not. But if I turn on key sync, going back into the arpeggiator, every time I press a new note, it restarts. So that's key sync. So every time you press a new note, it restarts the step sequencer to the very beginning. All right, so I'm going to turn all this stuff off. Quality, so analog. Now, this strangely only works when you have unison on. So if you don't have unison, sorry, I take that back. Okay, it does work either way, unison or no unison. But I guess it's more obvious when you do have unison voices. So let's get out of this monophonic mode. Let's increase polyphony. So detune will detune those individual voices to get that nice chorusing effect. And analog kind of does the same thing. The thing is, analog is also kind of random. So every time you play a new note, or play the same chord again and again, you notice it's not exactly the same every time. So that's what analog does. And yeah, I guess it also works in monophonic mode. Yeah, so like a detune or tune drift option with analog. Digital will reduce the sample rate and bit depth of the audio output. You'll notice how it affects the harmonic spectrum, as you can see there. So the original DX7 had a 12-bit output, I believe, but obviously your DAW plugins are running at a much higher bit depth. In fact, this is definitely below than 12 because you can even hear the little fuzzy high-frequency stuff. Can be useful. So that's the quality feature. It's basically one for tuning and the other for adding digital distortion. All right, now let's head over to the effects section. Here you add in effects to your sound. So I still have that same sound from earlier. I can now turn on any of these devices and they just start to appear. They're pretty straightforward to use. In fact, let's just start from scratch again. So I have this pure sine wave. I can add some overdrive. Pretty cool effect. Turn on this tube amp effect. We can get some pretty nice tones even though it's just a pure sine wave. Cabinet to emulate guitar / amp speakers. Some basic controls related to that. Very simple shelving EQ, but also very responsive. you can hear how it accentuates the high frequencies or attenuates it. Same for the lows. And there's an overall volume control. Peaking EQ, so you get two so-called peaks. So you can cut certain frequencies or boost certain frequencies, and you can do that at two different locations. You can adjust the Q, make it wider or more narrow, independently. And again, overall volume control. I'll turn these off. Next, there's a Tokwa, which is kind of cool. There's a very cool vocalized sound with the mouth parameter and also with the size. It's like we're adjusting the vocal track with the size. There's a little bright switch that just makes the whole thing brighter. Mod wheel is very cool. So now I have assigned the mod wheel. Well, turning on the mod wheel will automatically assign the mod wheel to this mouth parameter. Now you're also hearing vibrato because that's also set up by default in this default preset under the mod section. I guess we could turn that off. So going back into, where were we? The effects section, yes. So back in here. Now when I adjust the mod wheel, we only hear the Tokwa effect and we don't hear any vibrato. Phaser. Flanger. Tremolo. I like this tremolo because it also has a stereo mode, so you can get that stereo panning effect. But if you turn off stereo, crank up the intensity, you can get your classic tremolo effects. There's a very nice reverb here. And fairly straightforward controls. This is the Psyche delay. It's basically a delay, but there's a very cool reverse option. You can transpose the delayed signal. Stereo widen the overall signal. It's already kind of like in ping pong modes, but this makes it even wider. And one nice thing is that this transposition happens for every subsequent repeat. So let's say if I set this to plus, actually let's set it to +2. So for every feedback repeat, you'll notice that the pitch will go up by 2 semitones. So you can create pretty interesting pitched effects with that. So that's a Psyche delay. And then finally, there's a chorus/delay. It's in chorus mode if the time is set to a really low value. And it's in delay mode if it's cranked up. There's an overall master control for the effects. So this will just bring everything down. And you also get templates or presets just for the effects. Alright, so that is the effects section. Next, let's check out the Arpeggiator. So as I said, it's not just an arpeggiator, it's also a step sequencer, or as they call it, the pattern editor. So I'll start from scratch here. Disable that vibrato. Alright, so turn on the arpeggiator, play a chord, and it'll arpeggiate those notes. There are presets here for the arpeggiator. Let's move along and check out the other parameters here. Hold is, as the name suggests, we'll just hold whatever you play. So I'll play a chord, let go, and now my hands are free to adjust other parameters. And if I turn off hold, it'll disable whatever notes were held. So down, it's a little confusing. So basically, if I play a C major triad, so it's counting from the lowest note onwards. But if you turn on down, it counts from the highest note onwards. So it's kind of counting backwards. So this is the first note, this is the second, and this is the third. All right, but then there's also the direction thing. So ping, pong, rap, last, first. So let's try out some of these. Random. I like pause. So what pause does is, so let's say if I just have 3 notes in my arpeggiation, it just plays those 3 notes, and then for the remaining steps, it doesn't do anything. But of course, when it cycles back up, it repeats the 3 notes. So that can be kind of interesting. We haven't looked at this stuff here. One shot means that it's just going to play the arpeggiation once, and then just stop. And it's not doing it. I believe, yeah, there's some kind of a thing with this one shot. Yeah, I think it only works when key sync is on. So I already talked about key sync earlier. So now that key sync is on, this arpeggiator or the step sequencer is going to jump back to the beginning every time I press a new note. And now that one shot is on, it just plays it once and it's done. All right, cool. So that's all those things. Tempo sync. Obviously, you want your step sequencer to be synced to your project tempo. But with tempo sync off, you can actually change the tempo. So this can get a bit messy. So I would recommend just having tempo sync on. And when tempo sync is on, you can't edit the tempo. We looked at this in the other window, but you can change the arpeggiation rate here. Switch to triplets mode or a dotted mode. Note length. You notice right now it's kind of staccato, the individual notes. Now it's trying to play every note at its full length, but I can make it really short as well. Shuffle. Pretty self-explanatory, adding some shuffle to the groove of the playback. Velocity. So if I turn velocity off, it's actually going to listen to your incoming velocity. Now, right now, the preset is not using velocity. So let me just make this a little bit more FM-like and introduce some velocity sensitivity. All right, going back into the arpeggiator, if I play my chord gently, you can hear it's soft and every note gets the velocity. If I strike the keys harder, it's louder. But if I turn on velocity, I can define what the bass velocity is going to be. And I can define the accent. And there's an accent here. And in the step sequencer, you can choose which steps will have the accent. All right, a lot of stuff to look at here, but before we go over here, let's talk about this. So you can choose to have splits. So if I turn on split, notes above C3 will not use the arpeggiator, but notes below will use it. You can turn off bass so it's the other way around. So bass notes are clean, but higher notes will use the arpeggiator. And you can just hit learn to decide where that middle point is going to be. I just played C4 and now we've moved the middle point to C4. All right, I'm going to turn off split for now. Let's talk about this stuff here. So we can have up to 32 steps in this pattern editor. And you can choose to turn on and off individual steps. You can add ties. Here it doesn't make sense because my note doesn't have a long length. Accent, we already talked about accent. Note order. So right now it's just following the order, but I can click here and change up the order. And this is defined per step. So I can select random for this step. And I can set all for this step. So for that particular note, it just holds the entire chord. It got stuck there, maybe because of the note length. Let's make it a bit shorter. Yeah, it's kind of acting a bit finicky, but that's an all feature in the note order. All right, octave, straightforward. So you can set octaves for each step, up or down by 2 semitones. Let me disable that all thing. Transposition. So octave is octave transposition and this is just semitone transposition. So technically you could have just held down a single note and you can define a melody over here. And if it's going to take too much time to set that up, you can hit this dice button, which will just randomize everything. And now we have this random melodic phrase. Randomize the octave, note order, accent, tie. And you can also reset everything. Now here's one really odd, I would say it is a bug in FM8's step sequencer. And this has been the case for, I don't know, 6-7 years. So let's talk about what exactly that is. All right, so to explain this, I'll just do a C major triad. All right, so I'm playing a C major triad. Let's make it a bit longer. And let's slow this down so we can hear it. In fact, let's make it 8 steps. All right, so we can hear the accent there. Let's also transpose that very first step. So our step sequencer is running along. I'm going to play a chord. Okay, we can hear that change there. But let's turn on key sync. So every time I press a new note, it starts from the beginning. So you notice there? I'm going to play a chord now. It skipped, you notice it skipped the first step on the first cycle, and on the second cycle, we heard that first step. So it's almost like this key sync is not for step 1, it's for step 2, which is really strange. In fact, if I switch to one-shot mode, it plays the whole thing and it stops, obviously, and we never get to hear that octave above. So it's kind of strange how that is. And it's been like this for ages. Having talked about this will just move or like kind of shift the sequence forward or backwards. But yeah, aside from that one little bug, it's a very powerful arpeggiator. Alright, so that's the arpeggiator. Next, let's check out the easy/morph section. So this stuff here will make sense if we have a preset. So let's load in, also not just a preset, but something that already has a lot of stuff going on. That may be a bit too much. Let's try this one here. Okay, something like this. Ensemble strings. So going to the easy morph section. So the easy section is the stuff over here on the left. And this is the morph section on the right. So the idea with the easy section is to quickly tweak parameters from the preset without having to go into this expert mode and figure out what's going on here. So let's say when I play a chord, you notice that the sound kind of takes a while to kick in. So let's make that attack a bit quicker by bringing this A parameter down. You hear that? It's a bit faster now. Or let's make it even longer. Now it's taking forever to build up. Same for the timbre. So let's say I want the timbre to gradually get brighter. I can do that. Now this is assuming that in this patch, we already have some kind of a timbral change. And this will just tweak it further. Same thing for the LFO, the timbre here and the output here. So let's look at this harmonic thing. So kind of adjust the tuning actually of the different operators, but that's what that is doing. Overall brightness. I'll make it a bit darker. Detune. Velocity sensitivity, but yeah, affects everything on this particular patch. Same for the LFO over here. There's this output section, which is basically, I believe, the same as the master output. Let's find out. So the master output is slightly above halfway over here. Oh, this wasn't. Okay. But I guess, yeah, I can offset it. And you can see here the harmonics, they all go down. So I brought down the level of all the internal elements of the synth, even though the master is up. So yeah, I was wrong. This is not linked to the master. It's just another overall volume control. But it acts like a master. And again, overall stereo width, you can make it more mono or widen it further. Make your velocity sensitivity less sensitive or more sensitive. Quick access to your effects. So we had this overall global amount for effects. This is linked. So you can see here the parameter is exactly at the same position that it is over here. And you can quickly turn on and off individual effects from here. All right, so that's fairly straightforward stuff. I personally don't spend too much time on this section, but this stuff over here is pretty cool, very unique to FM8. So what we get here is a XY grid. They call it the Morph grid, and we can morph between 4 different states of the synth. In fact, if you look at that effects amount knob, you can see how it's moving when I jump around here. Now, unfortunately, the interface is not depicting exactly what's happening. It looks like it's jumping, but it actually is smoothly transitioning from one value to another. All right, now what exactly is happening and how can we set this up? You'll see there are 4 corners over here, and in these 4 corners, it just says ensemble strings number 1, which is the name of the preset. Now what I can do is go to my browser here and just load in a different preset, maybe something similar. Let's say kind of have like a synth pad, airy pad, maybe something like this. Say slow attack. All right, so we have these different presets. Let's load these into the grid by just dragging and dropping it in any of these 4 quadrants. Dr. Floyd goes here and Mordor goes here. And the top left corner, let's say we leave it at that original preset. So ensemble strings over here. And bottom left, you'll notice the harmonic content changes drastically as we move here to this preset. And then this corner, very different. And then this corner. And of course, we can just move it around. Now, if you find a cool spot, let's say this spot here, you can hit the normalize timbre, and now that position has been spread across to the 4 quadrants. So now if I move this around, nothing changes because it's all the same sound. So it's like kind of a random seed that you're adding to your patch, creating a new patch from there, and then kind of building on it further. Let me go back. I guess I can't undo. So let's add in more of these presets here, just to demonstrate this feature. All right, so what else can we do aside from just kind of morphing between different states of the 4 different presets? It doesn't have to be this one position. So let's say at this one position, let's look at this effects amount. So it's at 100% here, but over here it's at 77%. So, and of course, even though it looks like it's jumping, it is kind of gradually moving over here. Now what I can do is instead of just starting from this position, I can choose to spread it across that, the y-axis vertically. And I can also spread it across the x-axis. So now at this position, we're not really taking the value from this position. We're also kind of taking the value from all these other positions over here. And now when I morph, it'll sound, well, sounds a bit random, but it's basically even more random because it's not just taking from that one position, it's taking from all these other positions. And if you don't feel like this is sounding good, you can click on this random seed here to kind of change the pattern. Pattern meaning the pattern of randomization. So yeah, so that's basically this random seed thing. So let's switch it back to just that one position. Now, technically, it's not morphing through every possible parameter on the synth. There are very specific parameters that morph, and there are other parameters that do not morph. So any knob or control that has this icon will morph on the morph pad. So you can see effects clearly is morphing. None of this stuff is morphing. What else? In the master section, quality. So we can even morph from, let's say, high quality digital all the way up to, I guess, low quality digital. We can, what else can we morph? Effects, you can't morph individual effects parameters, only the overall amount. On the arpeggiator, as you can see, nothing can be morphed because that'll be kind of complicated to morph arpeggiator settings. And then, yeah, as we discover all the detailed controls of the synthesizer, you will see that morph pad button. So you know that, oh, okay, so this parameter, I guess, can be morphed from one position to another. And you can see that move as well. And again, it jumps, but not all of them jump. Some of them do jump, but some of them do move very gradually. And you'll see the timbre also gradually change because parameters are gradually changing. and they're not jumping across. So I think that's it. That's the easy section as well as the morph section. All right, so I was going to move on to the next section, but I realized that I did not show you how to create your own morphs. So let's take a quick look at that. I've reset this back to the default preset again. So let's take a look at morphing just with effects. So I'm going to turn on these two effects. So we have this heavy distortion on that pure sine wave. And let's say I want to morph from 100% effect to no effect at all. Okay, so how do we do this? So let's say at this position, these are the settings with the amount all the way over here. And I want to go up all the way to this side. And I want to set this to a lower value, let's say all the way down to 0. You notice how it turns red? So that's its way of letting us know that it has recorded that change in that position. So now, when I play, we don't get any effects. If I move this over here, we get heavy distortion. And if I gradually move this little dot, we're slowly taking away those effects. So yeah, so that's basically it. And then you can try this with any of those parameters that have that little icon. All right, now, finally, let's take a look at the expert section. I would say the most important aspect of the synth, where all the FM synthesis stuff happens. Now, this expert tab is not one tab. It's kind of like many tabs within one. So all these different sections are part of the expert tab. All right, so I guess let's start. Again, I'll start from scratch. Let's start with this section over here. So A, B, C, D, E, F, and X and Z also. They all look kind of identical. But from A to F, these are all the individual operators. So you can think of it like detailed view for each of the different operators. Now, I'm not going to explain operators and explain FM synthesis. That would take up a lot of time, and there are tons of other videos on that. I even have a course at macprovideo.com that goes into a lot of detail with FM synthesis. Right now, we're just going to learn the synthesizer. All right, so let's say I'm looking at operator A over here. These are all the parameters for operator A. It looks like nothing is changing because all the parameters are identical. But if you look over here, as I click around, you can see that we're changing. And if I click on operators, I get to see all those operators simultaneously. Not all the parameters, obviously, but the essential ones. Let's say I want to look at all the envelopes. So if we click on A here, this is the envelope section. If I click on envelope, I get to see all the envelopes for the different operators. Mod section, this is nothing related to FM synthesis. This is just a modulation matrix where you can use these two LFOs to modulate stuff, and also some MIDI controls, like we looked at that mod wheel thing for vibrato. So that's set up over here. We'll get back to this. KeyScaling, also very important and set up for individual operators. There's also microtuning. This is helpful for people who like to work in strange scales. So we have some tuning presets. And I believe, no, you can't import. All right, yeah, you can't import .tun files, but you can create your own custom tunings. Spectrum view, this we talked about earlier. So if I introduce some FM synthesis, we'll see the resulting waveform. So you don't need an oscilloscope, you can just look over here. And we also see the individual harmonics that are being added to the sound. Then finally, there's a pitch section for like pitch bending and pitch modulation controls. All right, so let's start with the operators. Actually, let's start with this FM matrix here because it's same for all the different operators. So in the FM matrix, we get to see all the operators. Again, I'll start from scratch here. By default, operator F is going to the output. So this bottom section, consider this to be the output. So it's up at 80% loudness. If I double click, I can get rid of it. But if I click and drag, I can increase it. Maximum is obviously 100%. So operator F is going to the output, and operator F is a pure sine wave, as we can see here. Below this, you get panning. So I can pan operator F to the left or to the right. Now this gets a bit confusing because there's panning here as well. Oops, I'm sorry. We're looking at A over here. So let's click on F. So we're looking at F. So disable that. Okay, cool. So it does not get confusing because you can see they both move together. Same for level. So if I adjust this, you can see the level of that operator is also being adjusted. All right, fairly straightforward. So I have multiple operators. I'm only using one right now. If I want to activate any of these other operators, I can right click and turn it on. And again, just double click. No, you can't double click to maximize it. You can click and drag to increase it and double click to get rid of it completely. All right, so that's basically how this works. If I want D to modulate F, I can click and drag here. The arrow shows in which direction the modulation is happening. So D now is the modulator, whereas F is the carrier because it's going to the output. Now you can choose to kind of have hybrid roles. So D is a modulator right now, but it can also be a carrier. So we're hearing it simultaneously while it's acting as a modulator. So you can create really complex signal paths like this. Again, these guys are not on. I can just right click to turn on all of them. And now that's our resulting sound. We can create a feedback path, like let's say D is then going to modulate A. Individual operators can also modulate themselves. So you can click right above. And now that creates feedback. If you increase this above 50, it can kind of completely destroy your sound and turn into like a noise-like timbre. All right, double click to get rid of that. There are presets, so you can choose from any of these. These numbers, what do they refer to? So 2 carriers for modulators, number 2. Let's do 2 carriers for modulator number 5. You get a different version of that. What's really cool is FM Matrix has that icon, so you can use this in that morphing section we looked at earlier. You can also save your own FM matrices. What else? Oh, these two over here. So X, I guess, is an operator as well, but it's not an operator in the traditional sense. It's a noise generator and a saturator. And you can choose to use either or both. So again, let's start from scratch. Let's say F is going into... Was it X? Yeah, X, sorry, not Z. F is going into X. Let's right click to turn it on. And let's send it to the output. Now, F is a pure sine wave, so let's make it a bit more buzzy. Okay. So it's going through this saturator. The saturator level is up. But if I add some of this asymmetry, yeah, it's kind of subtle, but it's definitely changing the tonality. But if you want, you can disable the asymmetry thing, and just use the noise generator. So now we have noise. In fact, we don't even need this. We just can get noise by itself. So we can have F going to the output and X going to the output, kind of layering in noise. But if you do crank up asymmetry, it affects the noise signal. All right, so that's X. Z is an operator, but it's actually a filter. So if I was to, let's say, modulate X with F, well, not modulate, but route it through X. So now we're adding some distortion, maybe adding some noise. And let's say that is going to the filter, right click to turn it on, and send it to the output. So the filter, this is kind of like Massive, if you have used Native Instruments Massive. You get 2 filters, and you get to mix between the 2. You can set them in parallel or series. And you'll see the resulting graph here. So right now, let's say we'll work with mix 1, so basically filter 1. So it's in low pass mode, that's the cutoff, resonance. Right now it's in low pass, but I can switch to high pass or anything in between. And then if I put this in the middle, I'll hear both, if it's in parallel, that is. The second cutoff, or the second filter, does not get a cutoff, it gets a spread dial. So it takes the cutoff from the first filter, and it can offset it with the spread dial. So that's how that works. All right, so that's the filter section. This is also very fairly straightforward. Envelope, we'll dive deeper into the envelope section. Let's go back and look at the operators. Let's look at all the different controls you get on the operators. So let's look at F, because that's going to the output. You can adjust the tuning. So in FM synthesis, tuning is adjusted in ratios. So think of it as a multiplier. So if I'm playing middle C, what is that, 261 point something hertz, multiply that by 1, you get 261 point something hertz. Multiply that by 2, you get an octave above. So that's basically how ratios work. And of course, you can get all kinds of strange fractional values as well. All right, let's set that back to 1. Just type in and hit enter. Offset is, as the name suggests, an offset to whatever tuning you've set based on the ratio, and it's measured in hertz. So I guess the best way to explain this would be to have 2 operators running simultaneously. So if I offset this one by 1 hertz, oops, sorry, that's 100 hertz. There you go. It's hard to hear, but you get that subtle beating effect. Now it's more obvious. Of course, now it's just going out of tune. And you can also have a negative offset, so it goes flat. One key difference between ratio and offset is fixed. It doesn't key track. So ratio is dependent on the note you're playing. So if I play this note, whatever that frequency is multiplied by 1. If I play this note, that frequency is multiplied by, let's say 2. But offset, it just adds that value to whatever resulting frequency. So let's say this is A440, multiplied by 2, we get 880 plus 2.9 hertz. And that would apply to any other note. It's just going to add 2.9 hertz. So this value will be more obvious as you go lower and less obvious as you go higher. So if you really want a consistent change in tuning, I would rather do something like this. So now it's not exactly 2, it's 1.96, which will give us not exactly an octave above, but slightly flat. Actually, that's quite flat. Let's make it closer. And this will be consistent across the keyboard. All right, so that's a little bit about tuning. Going back in here. Waveform. So traditionally, the DX7 or FM synthesis in general uses just pure sine waves, but you can click here and you get a whole variety of different waveforms. You can explore that on your own. Invert the waveform, kind of see what it does. Key sync. So basically, every time I press a new note, kind of like the Arpeggiator key sync, every time I press a new note, the waveform resets back to the 0 crossing. Pitch envelope. So there's a pitch section over here. So if you want this envelope to affect any operator, you need to turn on this button. And you can hear the pitch is kind of sounding a bit wonky. But if I turn it off, it still kind of sounds wonky. Okay, let's see what's going on here. So you create a particular shape, you set the envelope amount. All right, we can hear that now very obviously. Let's go back in F, turn off pitch envelope, and we don't hear it. All right, so that works. Cool. We leave this for later because this is basically the same thing over here. Yeah. So let's now move along. We're done with the operator page here. So all the operator pages are identical, or at least the first 6, A, B, C, D, E, F. They all have the same controls. We haven't looked at the envelope section yet. I'll save that for the envelope tab. Let's look at the operators tab. So here you get redundant information. Ratio, offset, waveform, invert, key sync, pitch envelope. Velocity sensitivity, I didn't talk about it, but yes, every operator has this velocity sensitivity control, and you can adjust that over here. And of course, for X and Z, they have separated it because clearly it's not like a traditional operator. So X is our noise generator / saturator. You're seeing some of those controls here, and of course the 2 filters. Cool. Let's now check out the envelopes tab. Now, yes, I can go into each operator and tweak its envelope by just clicking around here. And unlike a traditional subtractive synth engine where you only get, let's say, attack, decay, sustain, release, here you get this grid-based interface where you can tweak different parameters and design your own shape. So right now this looks like a traditional attack, decay, sustain, release envelope. But I can right-click to add additional nodes wherever I want. There is a maximum limit. I forget how many, I think 32 or so. But it shows you how many you have. I have 7 in total right now. I've selected number 4. Now here's something very interesting. Let me go in and reset this back to default gate mode. So there are presets over here. You can get an ADSR style shape if you want to. So let's leave this at kind of like an ADSR shape. And let's go into operator E, let's make it modulate F, and let's change its envelope. Let's pick one of these fancy presets here. Actually, let's pick the ADSR. So let's turn off that pitch envelope. So that's the shape for the modulators envelope. Now, if I was to just extend this a bit and right click anywhere in between this H sign, I've added this breakpoint. I'll add another one here. So this is basically the shape. But check out what happens when I play. So F has a similar shape. You notice that E is looping, or at least the envelope is looping. If you go to the envelopes tab, we see the same information. Here's F, here's E, and E is looping. So that's how it works in FM8. If you create additional breakpoints within this H section, it'll automatically start to loop. If you do not want it to loop, you can turn off the sustain stage. So then it just goes through and it kind of, technically, I guess this would have been the sustain point. It ignores that and just moves along to the release stage. I guess you can even get rid of the release if you want to. But yeah, so that's basically it. And again, we have some additional controls like tempo sync. So you'll see the numbers of the back change. So you can kind of click and drag around to adjust the view. So that's a 4th 16th note or the 4th 16th note. And as I drag this, it kind of snaps to the grid points. Let's turn the sustain back on so this will loop. And all these parameters basically adjust. So let's say absolute time. You can, I guess you can't adjust absolute time, but you can adjust relative time. So absolute time is the time from the very beginning. If I double click in the background, we see the entire envelope. Absolute time from the very beginning to this point is 0.480. What is that? I guess milliseconds or seconds, 0.48 seconds. And relative time is 0.28. Relative meaning compared to the last breakpoint. So from here to here, it's 0.28 seconds. Now, when you're sliding things around, there's a slide mode, which did what I just demonstrated, but I can switch to fixed mode, and it'll just move that one breakpoint. That can be very helpful. You can adjust the level here. You can adjust the curve by just clicking on it or clicking on the slope parameter here. But like I said, yeah, there's some really cool presets. Let's check out the 4-blip loop. So like this, you can create pretty interesting rhythmic patches. Now, how is this envelope section different from the individual operators envelope section? You get to see the exact same thing. It's the exact same envelope. But in the envelope section, you kind of get like a quick overview of all the different operators envelopes. But you can also copy paste envelopes. So let's say I spent some time creating this really fancy shape, and I want to copy this over to D. Let's turn on D, right click, make it active. Right now D just has this gated shaped envelope. But let's say I want to copy this fancy E shape over to D. So it's a bit tricky, but ensure that the one that you want to copy from is kind of visible or bigger here. And then click on the link icon over here, link, on the one that you want to copy to. So I click on link. And yeah, technically it's not copying, it's linked it. So if I make any change over here, it will, the other envelope will follow along. Right, so they're linked. But you can, like once you've linked it, you can unlink and it stays. And then you can tweak it so it's independent from the other one. So that's one way to copy an envelope to another and still keep it independent. But yeah, so that's basically the envelope section. All right, reset this back. Let's now check out the mod section. This one is fairly straightforward. So you get two LFOs and you can use them to modulate any of the operators as well as modulate the overall pitch. So right now, LFO 1 via the mod wheel at about 20% is modulating the pitch. So if I play a note and crank up the mod wheel, we get vibrato based off of this LFO. So standard LFO controls, I don't have to explain this. All right, that's simple. Now I can choose to skip the mod wheel. I can say, all right, LFO, why don't you, at about 24%, affect the pitch without the mod wheel. So if the mod wheel is down, it doesn't matter. We're always going to hear vibrato. And this, by the way, is your pitch bend range, which is a bit odd because you would think that it should be here under transpose or pitch bend, but it's here in the modulation section. And you can kind of set this to -99 and maximum of 100. It's a really wide range there. You can use mod wheel to do stuff, other things, aftertouch, breadth, which was CC, I forget, CC2, yeah. Control 1 and Control 2. Now, Controller 1 and Controller 2 you define from all the other CCs aside from CC1 and CC2. And you define that, I guess I skipped it earlier. It's in the master section. Yeah, see, Controller 1, Controller 2. You get to define what CC it is. So right now, Controller 1 is CC4, Controller 2 is CC11. So I can use that to modulate something. Now, what exactly is it modulating for the operators? Let's connect LFO1. I'll disconnect this. Again, double-clicking to disconnect. Now click and drag here. So LFO1 is now going to affect operator F. But what about operator F is being affected? So you can hear it's just the volume. And it is a polyphonic LFO because you can hear every note gets its own LFO, so you can kind of get this chaotic tremolo effect. So going back in here, that's basically how it works. I believe you can turn on sync to disable that polyphonic. Now sync just makes the rate sync to the project tempo. Key sync will reset this shape back to 0. So yeah, I guess there's no way to make the LFO monophonic. You just have to ensure to play all the notes simultaneously. If you play it even slightly arpeggiated, every note will get its own LFO, so it may sound a bit messy. So yeah, that's basically the modulation section. So you can use any of these modulators to affect the level of all these guys. And I guess for the filter, it should be the filter cutoff. Let's find out. So LFO1, crank it up all the way up for Z. I'm not using Z yet, so right click, turn it on, send the signal to that, and send this to the output. What's happening right now? Oh, it's maybe a bit too much, so let's tone that down. Maybe even slow it down a bit. Yeah, definitely it's affecting the filter. Specifically the filter cutoff. Cool, can create some nice wobbles like that. Back, what else here? For X, it's volume. So X has that noise generator, so you can just use it to control the volume or create a tremolo effect on noise. So let's right click on X, bring it up, disable this. You can see the volume is changing. We're not sharing it because this amp is down. All right, so that is the mod section. Moving along, let's check out KeyScaling, which I feel is a very important parameter when designing FM patches. So here's the deal. So for each note, you can define how loud it's going to be. So if it's a carrier, it directly relates to volume. So let's say F is going to the output. So if I click on F, going back to keyscale, if I click on F here, I can adjust for every note. You can see here there's a note reference. I can adjust how loud it's going to be. So at this point, the level is, let's say 0. You can see over here. You can right click to add additional points. So at this note, whatever that note is that that's a G there. So at G, if I play G, the volume will be at -15. And of course, you have slope and all that stuff. But for modulators, same deal. So if a modulator, where are we? Keyscaling. If I do this, just to give you a quick example, in fact, let's just do this from scratch. So yeah, we have a carrier going to the output, turn on the modulator. It's affecting the carrier. So now, no matter which key I press, we get the exact same FM sound, or FM index, or FM depth, or whatever you want to call it. But let's say I want the higher notes, because they're too bright. I want those higher notes to have less FM. Basically, I want this to be lower. So this is basically what you can do. So for all these higher notes, see, it doesn't sound so bright anymore. I wish there was some kind of a reference to let us know which note we are hearing at any given moment. It definitely sounds less bright compared to that. So this is a great way to kind of tone down your FM-ness of a patch, because when you add too much FM, things can get kind of bright and shrill. So that's keyscaling for every operator, even for the filter, and even for the, what do you call this, the filter, Z, which one was the filter again? This is the noise, so that'll be level. Z is the filter. So yeah, going back to keyscaling. So you can, and by default, there's already keyscaling on the filter cutoff. So as you play higher notes, it gets brighter. But of course, you can change that. And this last thing is the micro tuning. We already talked about that. There are some presets here you can use. All right, we're almost done. Spectrum Analyzer, can't change this. It's just a helpful visualizer. Pitch. So there is a pitch section where you can adjust the pitch. We talked about this middle section, which we have in every operator, which is basically the mod section, but just for that operator. So let's say just for A, if I do something here, and if you go to A, you'll see all that set up over here. So same thing for, where were we? Pitch. So this middle section here is for pitch. Going back to a mod, you can see we have this pitch bend setup and 20% of this. If I disable this, going back into pitch, that's gone. All right, here's our pitch bend bending thing that we saw earlier in the master section. So the exact same option is available here. Just redundant, transpose, same thing as well. Tuning, same thing as well. Portamento. So all this is the same stuff. And also that analog thing. We talked about this where it introduces random detuning. So redundant stuff up top here, same redundant stuff in the middle here. And then we have this envelope. So you can create like a fancy, again, can be like a really fancy repetitive envelope, because if you place any kind of breakpoint within this H section, yeah, so this will basically loop. So let's use this to modulate, let's say E. So I'll just click on E here, and yeah, I think by default pitch envelope is on for all the operators. So let's turn it off for F, so it only affects E. So going back to the pitch envelope, that's our envelope. You notice that it's repeating. It's a very subtle amount, at 10%. Let's crank it up. There's also velocity sensitivity, so if you play softer, the shape is a bit more subdued, but if you strike the key harder, it's more dramatic. And I guess that would be everything. So we looked at all the different parameters on the synth. So fairly complex. There's a lot going on over here. And congratulations for making it this far into the tutorial. I just want to share that I have a book on the Apple Bookstore, the eBookStore, iBookStore, that is fairly affordable. It shows you how to create a bunch of sounds using FM8. So it's one thing to know how to use a synth, and I guess it's a totally different thing to create sounds from scratch. So that book can be helpful just to learn how to create specific sounds. All right, I hope that was helpful. Stay tuned for more.